All right. Anybody who's followed me for any period of time knows that I'm a huge fan of the website, The Bulwark, and I frequently tell people three websites that I think everybody should be subscribed to right now are The Bulwark, Talking Points Memo, and The Atlantic. Uh, I believe that those three websites and the people behind them are going to be absolutely indispensable over the remaining 3 years and 8 months of Donald Trump's second term. One of my favorite people at the Bulwark is a guy named JVL, Jonathan V. Last. He's one of the senior guys. He writes a daily newsletter called The Triad, which I subscribe to. And he does a couple of their podcasts, and he does some live events and things like that. He has a similar view of the American electorate that I do. I personally think that a majority of the American electorate are absolute fucking morons, profoundly uninformed, stupid, selfish, and just all around dipshits. And I think the 2024 election result demonstrates that in the clearest of terms. You know, rather than vote for Kamala Harris, our electorate chose a guy who tried to overturn the last election, an adjudicated rapist. He'd been indicted on 91 felonies in 4 separate jurisdictions. He had been convicted on 34 felonies for trying to improperly interfere in the 2016 election. Less than 6 months before Election Day 2024, he tried to overturn the 2020 election, caused a violent insurrection at the Capitol, allegedly committed 32 counts of violating the Espionage Act in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Knowing all of that, our electorate said, yep, we're going with that guy, rather than the black lady with a funny laugh. I have an immense amount of disdain for our electorate in this country, or that portion of our electorate, let alone the 90-ish million people who couldn't be bothered to show up and vote at all. It's hard to argue that we're not getting exactly what we deserve right now. It's hard to argue against that anyway. But you know, Jake Tapper's book is out about Joe Biden, and a chunk of JVL's Triad newsletter today deals with that. And then there's a second section that I think is really on point, given that this is the discussion that we're having. You know, Joe Biden's decline over the last 2 years of his presidency and his decision to run again. And so I guess just to give, again, I think everybody should subscribe to the Bulwark. They have some amazing podcasts. They have some really good columnists, some really good writers on staff. I always learn things that are relevant when I go to their website. And I was talking to somebody today. I was listening to one of the podcasts they have. Is a podcast every week. I think comes out on Fridays, with George Conway and Sarah Longwell from the Bulwark. And she does a great podcast on Saturdays called The Focus Group too. But it's George Conway explaining legal issues in the current circumstances in which we live. And I mean, I've practiced law for 26 years, but, George Conway practiced law at a kind of a level above where I'm at. And it's always very, very helpful for me in kind of, going through my own arguments in my own head, to listen to some of the explanations that George Conway provides in a legal framework. But anyway, let's get to JVL's newsletter today. It's just called Joe Biden is Not Your Scapegoat. And it's subtitled Biden Failed, So Did the Rest of Us. And I think that second part is such a critical thing. And that's the second part of his newsletter today. So let's go through the first part. First, please pray for Joe Biden and his family. No doubt, man, with his cancer diagnosis. That's just absolutely horrible. Second, Biden's failures have been well chronicled, and yet in this litany, people usually ignore his most consequential mistake. Third, Biden's biggest failure was that his theory of America was wrong. And I was reading through this morning, and I was like, okay, I think that he believed we were a different country than what we actually are. Fuck, I believed we were a different country than we actually were going into Election Day last year. I dramatically underestimated the number of selfish idiots who, racism, misogyny, and bigotry included, transphobia. I underestimated the number of those fucking people. I just did. Biden could have governed as a radical intent on destroying the populist project, Trump, MAGA. This would have meant aggressively pursuing criminal charges against Trump and his Confederates. It would have meant forging normal legislation in order to foregoing normal legislation in order to pursue broad systemic change. Such a course would have been risky and probably unpopular. Instead, Biden governed like a normal president in a normal moment. He pursued mostly popular, mostly incremental reforms. He forged bipartisan majorities. He passed a lot of legislation, most of it focused on concrete items to improve the lives of American citizens, especially in red states. That's accurate. Biden's belief was that the Trump moment was an aberration and that America could return to its liberal equilibrium if he governed normally and gave the Republican Party space to heal itself and turn away from its authoritarian project. Biden's theory of the case was shredded by events. Jesus, no doubt, man. There's no way Biden could have known it would be. The course he chose looked like wisdom at the time. Had he taken the radical path, it would have been dangerous, and there are no guarantees that it would have worked either. But we can say without qualification, Biden's strategy for defeating populist authoritarianism failed. It's odd that no one talks about this failure, even though it's infinitely more important than his student loan scheme or the Hunter Biden pardon. Fourth, instead, and this is really accurate and I think really timely given the books and shit that are coming out, instead we focus on his failure to abandon his presidential reelection sooner. I understand this fixation. Let's stipulate to that. Knowing what we know now, Biden should not have attempted to run. He and or his inner circle undermined Kamala Harris's chances during the race and, to their discredit, have abused her since. Yeah. Perhaps Trump would have been defeated if Biden had declined to run, or pulled the plug sooner, or called for a primary instead of endorsing Harris, or endorsed Harris and then not hobbled her effort. I mean, they really just fucking handcuffed her right out of the gate. Yet, I don't think any of that is why we fixate on Biden's original sin. The reason we, and by we I mean everyone who's not MAGA, have made Biden the scapegoat is because the reality is too dark. It wasn't just Joe Biden who failed. It was America. All of it. Part 2, the fault in our stars. Let us list our failures. Buckle up, kids. Donald Trump, he's not a hurricane. He has agency. That he has chosen to press his authoritarian project is his fault, first and foremost. The Republican Party, boy howdy, I was thinking about this weekend. I can't remember what I was doing, but I was just thinking, I was out walking when I was in Las Vegas. And I was just thinking how many fucking off-ramps these guys had over the years, the Republican Party. Republican elites had so many opportunities to stop Trump. They could have voted to impeach him the first time and make Mike Pence the president. They could have voted to convict him the second time and prevented his return to office. They could have united against his 2024 candidacy after the insurrection at the Capitol and his attempts to overturn the election and his 91 felony indictments and 34 felony convictions. I added that last part. Ron DeSantis could have declared earlier and preempted Trump's announcement. All of the GO candidates could have attacked Trump instead of acting like his surrogates while they were putatively campaigning against him. Do you remember those debates? The Republican campaign primary debates at the beginning of 2024, the debates that Donald Trump never even went to one of them. And all of those Republican candidates were up there fighting with each other about who could defend Donald Trump the hardest, except for Nikki Haley. And then even she caved at the end, much to Sarah Longwell's chagrin. All of the they could have declined to endorse him and instead rallied behind Kamala Harris, the scary black lady with the funny laugh. Then we have Republican voters. They chose to give Trump the biggest non-incumbent primary landslide in history. They were not hornswoggled. They didn't lose a close vote. They demanded Trumpism. The media, the mainstream media, by which I mean broadcast news networks, leading newspapers, the neutral political press, never figured out how to cover authoritarianism. Imagine what it would have looked like if the New York Times and CNN had been run with the same clarity of vision as The Atlantic. Now recall that those two outlets, New York Times and CNN, how they actually performed. Endless headlines distorting reality so as to help Trump, giving Trump access to live air with a friendly studio audience for his town halls. The editor of the New York Times actually said that liberal democracy was just one issue among many, like immigration or tax rates, and that, at any rate, it was partisan issue and thus would be improper for his paper to take sides on the issue of liberal democracy. The last several years have made me irrationally angry at the New York Times for many reasons. The elites, with a handful of honorable exceptions, people in positions of influence who understood the dangers of Trump that Trump posed, did not speak up or did so only in a perfunctory manner. Jim Mattis, Bill Barr, Rex Tillerson, George W. Bush, Jeb Bush. There were dozens and dozens of them. Where were they? Hell, in the business community, most of the elites were openly rooting for Donald Trump. And then we get to one of my biggest disappointments. He titles it the judicial system, but I mean, the criminal justice system failed. Judge Eileen Cannon, who handled the most important criminal case against Trump and the most airtight and the easiest one to prove at trial, was so cartoonishly in the tank as to be beyond belief. A Trump appointee, she was happy to be reversed on appeal and chastised by appellate courts again and again, so long as she was able to achieve her goal of preventing his case from going to trial before the election. That trial should have been done and over with 8 months after indictment. And she dragged it out for almost 2 years past the election. The appellate system did nothing to rein her in, did not remove her from the case, did nothing. It did nothing. Then we have the Supreme Court. The High Court could have stopped Trump's candidacy by upholding the plain text reading of the 14th Amendment. Instead, it created a right for insurrectionists to run for president. The Section 3 of the 14th Amendment basically says you're ineligible for federal office if you participated in or aided and abetted an insurrection against the United States. You remember that one that we all watched live on television? In a 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court said that doesn't apply to Donald Trump. Likewise, the court could have allowed criminal prosecutions against Trump to progress. Instead, it created a writ of presidential immunity after hanging on to it for 7 months during an election year. And just put the brakes on it, man. In all things, the court could have chosen to move with alacrity. And if there are any Trump supporters watching this video, alacrity means speed. enthusiasm, a sense of urgency. Instead, it delayed nearly every action until the last possible moment, as if by delaying their choices, they might be absolved of them. And Biden's inner circle, the people closest to Biden, must have known that he could not run a vigorous campaign. They should have spoken up, first privately, then, if necessary, publicly. If Biden didn't listen, they should have left the campaign. His family, likewise, should have been candid with him. That's another thing about this, man. It's like, I don't even know if Biden is still, to this day, even aware of his own mental and physical decline over the last 3 years. He may not be. I mean, he was on The View a couple of weeks ago and was still talking about polling numbers from 2024 that he believes to this day, based on polling, that if he had stayed in the race, he would have beaten Donald Trump. There was no polling anywhere that showed that to be the case. None. Zero. He was polling at like 38% or something ridiculous. But to this day, he believes that the polls showed that he was winning. Maybe he doesn't know. Who knows, man? I don't know. Democratic voters, they did not turn out the way they did for Harris that they did for Biden in 2020. A key percentage of them actually switched sides and voted for Trump. Independent voters, every voter who said that his or her personal financial situation was good, but that the economy was bad, and so felt forced to vote for Trump, failed the most basic test of civic responsibility. Not to mention the people on the left who refused to vote for Kamala Harris because of Gaza and the Palestinians. And look where we're at now. His last category is me, meaning him. But a couple of these things apply to me as well. Did pro-democracy people like me help? Nope, not one lick. I've got one job, helping you see around corners, and I failed it too. I didn't realize how bad Biden had gotten until the debate. Same. I didn't understand that Trump could pull damn near 50% of the electorate. Same. I didn't foresee that Trump would use foreign gulags to circumvent the court system. Same. If you're keeping score, that's a failure of perception, a failure of analysis, and a failure of imagination on my part. And I think this is the important part. What I am describing is a total systemic failure. Joe Biden didn't fail America. America failed America. We blame Joe Biden now because he was the last link in the chain and because it's safer for us than coming to terms with the reality of who we are collectively as America. I added that last part. And because Biden is fading while the reality endures, it's safer to lay the blame at his feet. It's cowardly, too, I think. Here's the truth. Biden could have done better. He should have done better. That he did not is a failing which marks his legacy. But he is not responsible for the creation of the world that we live in. To the contrary, he did more than most, certainly more than I did, to fight against it. That is the painful reality. Yeah. It's easier to blame Joe Biden than for us to look in a mirror right now. And Joe Biden didn't cast 75 million votes, or 77, whatever the number was, for Donald Trump. Americans did that. Dumb, uninformed, stupid, selfish, greedy, racist, bigoted, misogynist Americans. Anyway, I thought that was a good column and kind of a really good perspective from JVL at the Bulwark this morning. So I wanted to share that with everyone. As always, well, first, subscribe to the Bulwark. It's a great site. You know, one of my favorite things about the Bulwark is it helps me feel like I'm not alone in this, you know. It helps me feel like I'm not just completely losing my fucking mind. You Yeah. So subscribe to the Bulwark. You will not regret it. If you like this video of mine, please click like. Please subscribe to my page. Leave a comment. And I'll see you guys soon. Thank you.